Hello, my friends. This is Baal Kadmon, and I would like to thank you for watching and or listening to this podcast. This is just going to be like a quirky little podcast. It came out of a discussion I was having with someone like 2 days ago about like the quirkiness of the Old Testament and some quirkiness in biblical Hebrew. And I was thinking, oh, this might be entertaining. People might like to see this. And so I decided, let me create like a quick, well, it may not be so quick, a podcast about some quirkiness in the Old Testament and biblical Hebrew. Again, this is just for fun. So if you're not interested, then that's something else. But if you are, you might actually learn something here because it is actually quite interesting. So, and what I'm going to cover is some of it will be sort of linguistic, and some of it, actually one or two, will be sort of a mystical thing that you can't really tell in the English, but you can certainly tell in the Hebrew. So I hope you have fun with this. So first things first, something very basic. Not every book in the Old Testament has God in it. We're always used to the Bible having, God mentioned everywhere, right? Since the Bible is a religious text. But there are two books in the Old Testament that never mention God directly. There's no reference to Jehovah. There's no reference to Elohim. There's no reference to Adonai. There's nothing. And that is the book of Esther, which largely took place in Persia, and the Song of Songs, or the Song of Solomon. And those two books do not contain any reference to God directly. They say the Song of Solomon or Song of Songs might be about the relationship of God with his people, but otherwise there is no direct reference to God in either of those books. So that's a nice little trivia there. Now, before I continue, because the next few little odd things are Hebrew-based, that are very unique to Hebrew. And one aspect is that one Hebrew word will be translated or will convey 3 or 4 different words in English in a particular verse. So let's look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 5 we have here. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning one day. Now look at what he has here. And the darkness. That is 3 words in English. But in Hebrew, it's one. It's velachoshech. And to the darkness. You see? So this is actually 3 English words in one Hebrew word. So that's an interesting quirk about Hebrew, is that it can actually condense several words in English into one in Hebrew. And that's also why sometimes translations can be a little tough, because you're trying to translate something that may not be so easy to translate. Let's look at Genesis chapter 19, verse 16. And it says here, but he lingered, and the men laid hold upon his hand, and upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of his 2 daughters, the Lord being merciful unto him, and they brought him forth, set him without the city. Now, if you look here, we have this whole verse, but here it says, beyado. That's in his hand, and that's one word. Be is in, o is the male masculine, and yad is hand. So in his hand, in one word. So that's really cool, right? So Hebrew is very condensed in that way. And these are just 2 examples of many, 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 many examples. Now, with that, we're going to go into the next topic, which is, you had to see that first, so then you would understand what I'm going to do now. Now let's go to 1 Chronicles chapter 1. And what you see here is Adam, Shet, Enosh. Adam, Seth, Enosh. This is the shortest verse in the Old Testament. And then, of course, these two follow. They're also pretty short. But this is the shortest verse in the Old Testament. There's only 3 words. In this case, it's 3 names. So that's a nice little trivia there. Now, there is another verse that is the longest verse in the Bible. And when I say longest verse, I mean longest in Hebrew, not necessarily in English. So that is the book of Esther, chapter 8, verse 9. And it's pretty long in English too. But look at, this is by far the longest verse in the Hebrew Bible. And this word here for satraps, this is a Persian borrowed word, achashdar panim, which is satraps. And that's borrowed from the Persian, which is, I believe, the Persian words for that. It's sitrab or shatarab, and it's a very, very similar word. And of course, this is taking place in Persia, and as you can see, we have governors and princes, satraps, and so it makes sense that this word would be here. But this is the longest verse in Hebrew in the Bible, and it is in the book of Esther. Now, the next little bit of trivia is the existence of words that only appear once in any type of form. And I always love those because they're so interesting. Here's an example, Isaiah chapter 34, verse 14. Now, in English, it's pretty standard. And the wildcat shall meet with the jackals, and the satyr shall cry to his fellow, yea, the night monster shall repose there and shall find her place of rest. Now, most of you know this verse because this is the first time and the last time we see the word or the name Lilith, in the Hebrew Bible. So it's like one of these very rare occurrences where you have one word that appears only once in the entire Old Testament in Hebrew, and that's it. Here's another example. If we go to, there are quite a few of these, but let's go to Proverbs 30, verse 28. And it says here, the spider thou canst take with the hands, yet is she in king's palace. That sounds a little clunky. Anyway, the word for spider is semamit. Semamit, by the way, it's usually translated as some type of lizard, but I don't know why it's necessarily a spider here. But semamit, this is it. This is the only place in the entire Old Testament that you will have this word, this specific word. Now, if we go to Genesis, I'll show you. And there's a few of these words. I'm not going to go through every one of them, obviously. Genesis chapter 6, verse 16. So it says here, a light shalt thou make to the ark. Now, that's a very particular sentence here, and a light shalt thou make in the ark. And it's probably like some type of opening in the top of the ark. But the word for light here, in this instance, is zohar. The thing is that in this particular context, this is the only time it is ever used in this way. It's probably, like I said, some type of opening in the roof so light can come in. But still, you'll never see this again in this exact form in the Old Testament. And there's quite a few other examples like this. So I think it's called the academic word for instances when words are only found once, either in one or another form. I think it's called the hapax legomena, in which you'll find words only once in one form or another within a given text. So these were a few examples of hapax legomena, and there's quite a few different ones. In this next example, I'm going to show you something called a nun verse. These are really obscure, okay? I mean, and again, you can only tell in Hebrew what they are. And there's about half a dozen of these in the Bible, maybe a little bit more. And basically what a nun verse is a verse that is that the scribes are saying is out of place, that it might not belong in this particular chapter in the location. It could be just telling you maybe it's one verse ahead or one verse behind here, and I'll show you what I mean. So let's go to Numbers chapter 10, go down to verses 35 and 36. Now, if you look at it in English, it seems pretty standard, but look what happens here. It actually starts in 34, verse 34. You have these little indications, but look here. This is the letter Nun. Okay, Nun is, but in reverse, so it's almost like a reverse Nun. Okay, and at the end, we have the Nun again. Okay, now this is one of the only verses that have this. Like I said, this might be half a dozen or fewer that have it. So even if we jumped to another chapter just anywhere, it's just not a common thing you see. So what does that mean? Okay, and there's a few different meanings, but I think that they're actually correct, is that this verse appears in the wrong place. It's out of its normal order. And it's very interesting because this is basically telling you somehow this was transcribed in a weird way, in an incorrect way. And notice here it starts at 34, 35, 36. In other translations, it starts at 35. So basically it's telling you in certain translations, this starts a verse earlier or a verse later. So that's just like a little trivia here, the Nun verses. So you might see this, but you'll only see it in Hebrew. You'll never see it in English. All right. So, and actually in the Dead Sea Scrolls of this particular verse, you also have sort of what looks like a Nun. So even from back then, they already knew, wait a minute, these verses seem maybe out of order, or there's one, it comes sooner or later. So that's a little trivia here. Here's an example of a more mystical understanding of the Bible. It's also something that you'll only see in Hebrew, but you won't see in English. And it's unfortunate because it's such a cool little thing. But let's look at the verse in Exodus chapter 3, verse 4. Let me go to it in here in English, because this translation here, it doesn't have an English translation. And here is where he calls upon Moses. And so it's Exodus 3. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I. Now, if we look at the Hebrew of the same verse in the Biblia Hebraica, which has a lot of annotations, which is very good, we have Moshe, Moshe. Now, on the surface, what does that mean? That's nothing. He just says Moses, Moses. But there is a difference between when God calls Moses and when God calls other people in the Bible. So we're going to go here in English, chapter 22, verse 11. And it says here, And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. Now we'll look here in the Hebrew and look at this. It says Abraham dash Abraham. So there's like a little indentation between the two Abrahams. Okay. On the surface, this doesn't seem like anything, but let me show you another example. Genesis chapter 46. And it says here, verse 2 of chapter 46, And God spoke unto Israel in the visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here am I. Let's go to Genesis 46 in Hebrew. And here you have verse 2, and it says here, Yaakov dash Yaakov. So you see, and there's others. There are other examples. The other one is with Samuel. It's the same thing. So the question is why when Moses is mentioned, there's no dash here? But when Jacob is mentioned and Abraham is mentioned, And, one other person, Samuel, why is it like that? Why is it that they have the dash and Moses doesn't? The mystical interpretation of that is when Moses became chosen by God to do whatever he was supposed to do to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, the line of prophecy never stopped, meaning God continuously spoke with Moses from that point on. Whereas with Abraham and Jacob, there was a halting in the prophecy. So God would speak to them once, then time would go by, they wouldn't hear anything from God, and then again. So basically, this little indentation, mystically speaking, shows that there was a break in the prophetic messages to these people. So whereas Moses didn't have a break, his was a continuous prophecy. So as you can see, it's a little obscure, and it can only be seen in Hebrew. But it is interesting, right? It's just like these little trivia, little obscure facts. And now there are many, many other things in the Bible that are obscure. There's no doubt about it. This is one of those examples. And like I said, we could sit here for years going through the idiosyncrasies of the Old Testament and Old Testament Hebrew. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this. Again, this was just like a spontaneous little trivia day. So a little update here. I am working on the Ancient Mesopotamian course. It's going to be massive. Okay, massive. I'm like, oh my goodness. Some mornings I'm waking up like at 3:30 in the morning just to start the recording process, to start the writing process, because I work best in the morning. And so I'll do that, and I'll be working right until 8:30 at night. And I'm in bed like like 9 o'clock. I'm like dead asleep, and sometimes even earlier. The one night I went to sleep like at 8:45. I was like completely knocked out. But I enjoy the process. It's a nice little process. And of course, my book Samael: A History has been out, and it's been a great success. Thank you so much in all its formats: the Kindle, the audio, the paperback. And I'm just getting feedback every day that this like really illuminated them and gave them more understanding of Samael. And I really appreciate all the kind words. I really do. With that, that's the end of this podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, a little quirky, and I will speak to you soon. So mote it be.